episode is brought to you by A3, a CMMC cloud-based collaborative environment for an organization seeking certification, otherwise known as an OSC, to build CMMC packages and share with a marketplace of consultant RPOs and assessor C3PAOs. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of 123 CMMC. My name is Dana Mantilia, and I will be your host today. And our guest is Vince Scott. Hello, Vince. How are you?
Morning. How are you doing, Dana?
I'm doing great. Why don't you take a minute and tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Vince Scott. I have my own company, Defense Cybersecurity Group, where we focus on consulting around particularly CMMC and the defense industrial base cybersecurity process. I'm a retired U.S. Navy cryptologist and information warfare officer. I sort of used to play offense. Now I coach defense, and watching all the exciting developments in the CMMC world as we go along here.
Mm-hmm. And we have a hot topic today that everybody wants to talk about, which is CMMC 2.0, the latest and the greatest. All right. So what are some of the biggest changes with CMMC 2.0?
Yeah, so I think change was inevitable in this standard. I've actually been blogging and talking for a while that as constructed, I thought we were building something that really wasn't executable across the entire defense industrial base. So the biggest thing that the Department of Defense has reintroduced into this is the concept of self-assessment. So under CMMC 1.0, they said, hey, if you mow the lawn at a DoD facility, you're going to have to be assessed in some fashion, right? Katie Arrington said that famously, 18 months or 2 years ago. Under CMMC 2.0, they've come out and said, if you are a level 1 company, so level 1 is the 17 basic security controls based in the Federal Acquisition Regulation. If that's, and you don't have controlled and classified information, you don't process, store, or transmit CUI, then you would only be subject to level 1, and you can self-attest to that, which is probably a big relief across the extended supply chain, right? That takes a lot of pressure off them. There are still 17 things in there that you need to do. You are self-attesting to the federal government that you are doing, and not all of those things are trivial or necessarily easy to do. There actually are some demanding requirements in those. If you look at those 17 controls and go to implement them in your company, there are real requirements there. But that now is covered by self-attestation. They got rid of levels 2 and 4. So we used to have a 5-level structure. 2 and 4 gone. We have a new 1, 2, and 3. Old level 3 is new level 2. Old level 5 is new level 3, just to make sure that everybody's paying attention, right? Mm-hmm. Make it a little bit more complex. So under the new level 2, old level 3, where you process, handle, or store controlled and classified information on behalf of the federal government, they have split that and said some of those companies are going to require an independent third-party assessment, so those haven't gone away, and some won't. And they use terms that aren't really defined in the regulatory lexicon. So it's hard for us to say, priority acquisitions that are important to, national security. I think there were a couple of different phrases they used, but none translated to, oh, we know this fits this category of contracts, so that's going to apply to these companies, right? So we know it's going to be split. We don't know how it's going to be split. In the CMMC town hall that went on immediately after these announcements, the Department of Defense said, we think that's going to apply to around 40,000 companies, but we don't know which 40,000. And then finally, new level 3, old level 5, which was always something we kind of had on the slate to worry about later after we got through the initial rush of all the level 3 stuff. The DoD has said DIBCAC, the Defense Contract Management Agency arm that is supposed to be doing inspections and assessments on behalf of the federal government around cyber, they're going to do level 5. Now, subsequent to that, there has been some suggestion that maybe that means those companies are going to have to get level 3 assessed independently, and then they're, for that higher level, what is going to be NIST 800-172 applicable controls, they'll get assessed by the government on just those instead of the entire body of cybersecurity work and controls. I think that's, just talk at the moment. We'd have to see that in the regulations that the DoD comes out with, right? So that loss of surety on that an independent assessment is coming is the next biggest change. And then finally, I think in the big changes category is the allowance for plans of actions and milestones. So we used to have those. We kind of have those under the current unenforced way that the regulation has been established and implemented. And really, unfortunately, they've become parking orbit for everything that companies don't intend to do ever, right? Technically, you can be compliant and say, yeah, I've got a POAM item. I'm going to get to it in 2050. And, I'll get to it when I get to it. Technically, that's compliant. And so you could put all your security controls on your POAM, not do anything cybersecurity wise, and technically meet the basic requirement of the regulation as it's currently implemented, which is a problem. So the DoD has also come out and said they're going to time bound that. There's discussion of that time bounding being no longer than 180 days. But again, that's discussion. We need to see that in the formal rulemaking so that we have something we can hang our hat on and say, yes, this is the way that's going to roll out. There's a lot of the people in the security community who view POAMs negatively. And I understand that as a parking orbit and as an excuse to never implement cyber because it's on the POAM, that's a bad thing. However, I view it and think that POAMs are a good thing primarily for one reason. They lower my regulatory risk. So I was really afraid of, and I serve as the chief security officer for a company as well as coach a number of different companies on this, is having an assessor come in that interpreted some basic thing differently than I do. And there are a number of interpretive debates in the professional community, probably transparent to a lot of people who don't pay deep attention to this. But there are some serious splits in people who've been trained as provisional assessors about, is this okay or is this not okay? And we've seen some really fundamental, 50-50, 70-30 sort of big sections of the community that just don't agree on some fundamental questions. So I was concerned about that. When you go to architect a solution, getting an assessor who doesn't believe in some of those fundamental interpretations of what the controls are calling for, what the edge is, where the scope ends, stuff like that. So I see POAMs as really mitigating that risk for a company, because if an assessor comes in and surprises you with something, hey, I thought we had advice, we've been working hard on this, we absolutely believe we're doing this in accordance with the regulation, and now the assessor says, nah, I don't see it that way. No. You could all of a sudden fail and have that be a real surprise. I think the POAM option says, okay, we'll put that on the POAM. We'll change that in the next 6 months. We'll come up with a way that we're going to do that. But you can still get your certification. And in that period of time, if it's something you're just not doing, you've got time to do it. And if it's something that there's a real interpretive challenge on, you have an opportunity to go back to the DoD CIO's office and say, hey, we read the regulation. We thought this other person came in and said, no, we're not compliant now. We would like you to adjudicate our architecture and have the DoD CIO's office come back and say yes or no. And honestly, I've done that in several places where I've seen arguments for companies that I support and go, hey, I think this is good, but I think there's risk in this. And we've gone to the DoD CIO's office to say, is our interpretation of this okay? Here's what we've done. Here's the way we've set that out. Is that all right? And honestly, in every case that we've done that, they've come back and said, yeah, that's fine. So I feel like the DoD CIO's office has been pretty reasonable about those interpretations in ways that some of the rule purists have not been reasonable. And so that would also give you the opportunity then to appeal and say, is this good or not? And then if you get something, you get a note back from the DoD CIO's office that says that is okay. Then you call your assessor back in and say, okay, I got a piece of paper right here from the DoD that says this is all right. Mm-hmm. And I think at that point they have to say, okay.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot more realistic. I mean, having every single level one, the old level one, having them required to have, an assessor. First of all, there aren't enough assessors right now to be rolling that out. So that
Not
would
new.
be the first problem. Then the second problem of not having a POAM and everything being pass fail. So you have a third party coming in to assess, and it's pass fail and no POAM. So I agree. I could see where people would say that POAM, oh, that's just an excuse, they're never going to get it done. But at least we're getting the ball rolling here, and maybe down the road they'll do away with that the next go round or something like that. But I think that they did do some good things to make it a little bit more realistic.
I don't know of a standard in the world. And under the old CMMC 1.0, we had 705 assessment objectives, right? Where you had a final exam. The final exam was a whole grade for the test, and you needed to score 705 out of 705. There isn't any standard in the world that operates that way. It's just not an achievable goal. One of the things that we were seeing, I think a lot of people didn't notice, but not very many companies have been qualifying as C3PAs very quickly, right? Some of that is throughput at DCMA, but more of that was the failure rate. In a couple of town halls ago now, I think, that DCMA briefed and they gave their numbers, and I did the math and said, well, you guys have got a 19% pass rate. So if we've got a 19% pass rate on companies that are totally focused on this standard, run by and for cybersecurity professionals in the cybersecurity space, and their pass rate is 19%, what's the pass rate going to be for the regular folks out there in the DIB? My previous statements on that was that's not moderate level of security anymore. That's not reasonable anymore. That's not, well, just stuff companies should be doing in order to be, have reasonable cybersecurity. No, we had moved beyond that into an area that really probably was not achievable for large sections of the defense industrial base, no matter how hard they worked. And I don't think the DoD or there was a great many people that would disagree with me on that statement. But I feel strongly that we had made this the way we were interpreting and planning to enforce the standard too hard. It wasn't executable. And so I welcome CMMC 2.0 from that perspective. And although it has created a lot of uncertainty for companies now about whether or not they need to be assessed, and that has resulted in some companies deciding that, hey, I'm not going to do anything with this cyber stuff until, the DoD rulemaking is over, which I believe is an error. That is the downside of this, but I do think we're moving in a more executable direction now under CMMC 2.0.
SteelRoot, a national leader in helping companies in the defense industrial base with CMMC preparation and federal cybersecurity regulations. Big or small, SteelRoot is here to help design, build, and manage IT. The SteelRoot reference architecture is a secure, cloud-native operating environment built on zero trust principles. SteelRoot also provides managed cybersecurity, IT, and virtual ISSO services. Visit steelroot.us for more information. I agree. So let's talk about assessments for a minute. Are assessments going to be dead? What's going on with the assessments?
Yeah, I've actually seen professionals in this space declare that independent third-party assessment, C3PAO, CMMC AB, that's all dead. The DoD canceled it all. It's all going to be done by the government. And I'm like, that's not what they said. Oh no, it's all, just give it 6 months. DIBCAC's going to be doing it all. That's not what they said. And we already know that the government arm for this, DIBCAC, who's been, by my estimate, kind of trying to read tea leaves and pull the numbers and see what they've said publicly, they're probably doing around 75 companies a year. That's not going to get us through 40,000 companies in any time real soon, right? So I think limiting DIBCAC to the very small number of level 5 companies or new level 3 companies is really smart. You're probably talking in the hundreds of companies, 300, 500 companies for which DIBCAC has a chance over the next 3 to 5 years of actually making it through that complete list at the pace in which they they tend to go forward. There's been discussion of, well, no, the government's just going to beef up and they're going to hire a bunch of people and they'll have more capacity then. Actually, they tried to do that previously and that failed. They weren't able to get the kinds of professionals that they needed at the government salaries that they were willing to pay under the government conditions, which primarily means, hey, fight DC traffic, drive 2 hours every day to get downtown so that you can be a part of DIPCAC. Or Arlington, or I think they're in Northern Virginia. But the point being, from a cybersecurity perspective, I think the vast majority of the fully qualified workforce is now well into we do all this remote. I don't have to live there. It's just very different than being a part of the government and having to work under the government rules. So I don't see them being able to staff up in a meaningful way that would give them the opportunity to make it through large swaths of even 40,000 companies sufficiently. That's why the government has moved towards commercial solution to this, because there isn't another solution that will allow the federal government to scale the way they need to scale.
Right. All right. So speaking of the C3PAO, so what companies can still expect to receive a C3PAO assessment? With all this being said, they're going away. They're not going away.
Well, if you purpose, handle, or store CUI, then the potential exists for you to be required to have an independent assessment. I think if you are a company that works in and handles what we call defense technical information, so technical information of a military or space significance is, I think, the definition of that. We're talking about if you got plans, parts for the Joint Strike Fighter, if you're helping to build satellites, if you're in the MDA Missile Defense Agency ecosystem, you're a UAV development company. Those kinds of companies are probably going to be more likely to see an assessment than others because there's sensitivity around the information related to that particular industry. Other industries that, I process, handle, or store some CUI, but it's not core to my business. It's not something we're doing a lot of. Maybe it's PII information, et cetera. Yeah, it needs to be defended, but I think you're more likely to see self-assessments coming your direction. The critical risk for companies going forward on this, particularly post rulemaking, when assessments start to be mandated in a couple of years, you won't know whether or not your contract is going to require an assessment or not. And contracting officers and program managers are going to be able to make that decision about whether or not their program is important, which they almost always think their programs are important, really needs that level of protection, right? So there's going to be a risk for a company. I think you need to be more prepared to flex to getting a independent assessment, because there's going to be risk that a contract that's important to you will come up and have that requirement.
Mm-hmm. So now, when will the C3PAO's assessment start? And is this going to be after rulemaking? Do we know?
Yeah, so what Matt Travis, the CEO of the CMMC accrediting body, has said is that they are going to work with the Department of Defense in order to enable C3PAO assessments to start in the near term. My guess, world according to Vince on this, no one has said this, probably 6 months-ish, which is actually pretty soon. I mean, there are several things that the Department of Defense has to do in order to enable C3PAO assessments to start as an option, not mandated. They have to enable the department to ingest those reports. Primarily, they've said that those are going to go into the database called EMAS. EMAS has to be ready to catch C3PAO assessments, and it's not ready yet. So that work's got to get done. The scoping guide needs to be published, and the CMMC assessment process, the CAP, needs to be published. So how are assessment companies supposed to do their work, around the setup and execution of assessments more than the nitty-gritty parts of the controls? We need those three things to be done in order for assessments to start. But I do think optional assessments will start next year sometime, and probably be available on a limited basis to companies that want to go ahead and get the piece of paper that says, yes, I am a certified CMMC level 2 company sometime, middle of next year, end of next year.
All right. So that being said, so how long is the CMMC rulemaking going to take relative to the assessments?
Well, the department has said 9 to 24 months.
Okay.
I think if you review the speed with which rulemaking has happened in general in the past, 9 to 24 months is an ambitious number. I fully believe that we're talking 24 months to maybe 36 months. Again, world according to events, no one has said that. I think they're liable to run over their 24-month time frame as a part of the rulemaking process, particularly since they've said they're going to change both 32 and 48 CFR. So 2 different rules have to be adjusted, not just one.
Okay, so we're looking a little further out than 9 months. 9 months sounds very unrealistic.
Yeah, I just don't see them being able to do that, right?
Yeah.
We've got Christmas coming up. I mean, heck, we're going to lose 2 months just because of the holidays. There's not going to be any rulemaking before the first quarter of next year. Not even from a proposed perspective, I don't think. So I believe, it's going to be, if they do 24 months, they're going to be probably doing good. If they shoot below 24, they've worked really hard at this and they've really pushed it through. I would not anticipate them undershooting 24 months by very much, if at all.
Okay. All right. And so our final question today is, does the CMMC accrediting body have any relevance or even exist now?
Yes. So that's actually a question and comments that I see quite a bit. So the CMMC accrediting body is a not-for-profit corporation founded in Maryland. Whether or not the DoD says exist or not exist really isn't relevant to the existence of the accrediting body. Now, whether or not it functions effectively is completely dependent on the DoD and their interaction. So the accrediting body still exists. The DoD on their own website and press releases has indicated they intend to continue to work with the accrediting body as a governing piece of the CMMC ecosystem, qualifications, certifications for assessment companies, that kind of stuff. So it does still exist. The plan is for it to continue to exist. I think the accrediting body, as an independent organization from the government that gets no funding from the federal government, they have a no cost contract that essentially enables the DoD to tell them what to do and not pay them to do it. I think there's probably extreme challenges for the accrediting body in order to continue to function as a corporate entity, because you need cash flow to do that. And clearly the move to CMMC 2.0, I think, has probably negatively impacted the number of people who are going to seek certifications, the number of companies that are, the number of people who are going to take classes and courses and all that stuff that was generating revenue for the accrediting body, so they can pay salaries for the professionals who have to do work to keep that stuff going, has been negatively impacted. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes for the accrediting body moving forward.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see. You think about all those RPs and the RPOs and what's going to happen with that. That probably was generating a lot of money. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, having started 2 not-for-profits in my own past, really they're a business that doesn't pay taxes because of their altruistic purpose, right? And cash flow is still just like it is for any other company. You have to have cash in, and you have expenses. The accrediting body is paying upwards of $1 million, I think, for the creation of certified tests, right? Mm-hmm. So that has to go through a process. There's ways that those tests are created. They've contracted with commercial organizations to go do that. They've got salary that they have to meet. They have, facilities, computers, website. They have all the things that a company has. Mm-hmm. So I honestly, there's an impression that, they've been raking it in and it's all free money. I don't think that's the case at all. And I think if you looked at the books for the CMMC AB, you would find that they certainly aren't heavy with cash flow compared to their obligations and outlays.
Right. Well, thank you very, very much for all of this awesome information, Vince. This was very, very helpful, and lots of people are wondering about, what happened with CMMC 2.0? So you did a great job of explaining a lot of lot of key factors. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Dana. I really appreciate being on your show. I like what you're doing.
Thank you.
It's great to be invited, and thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you too. And thank you everybody for watching and listening. And we hope to see you on the next episode of 123 CMMC. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.